Episode 28. So, fun-filled week. Again, we're trying to keep it short. What are we talking about? Astronauts stuck in space, astronauts not going on a spacewalk. And of course, the biggest talk of the town last week was NVIDIA's earnings are out and the world did not collapse. So that'll be something to talk about. And then another thing, OpenAI, again, back on the agenda with a supposed $100 billion round that apparently everybody wants to participate. That'll cover us today. Episode 28.
Thanks, Tony, for summarizing what we're going to talk about. But let's just get started with an update from last week. Last week, we talked about the Boeing Starliner astronauts. And when we were recording, they were about to make a decision on whether or not these astronauts would be able to return to Earth. And after we stopped recording, the decision was made. And NASA decided that the astronauts are going to come back on SpaceX's capsule. So, as you had actually implied in the previous episode, SpaceX has to come save the day and save these astronauts who are stuck in space. Now, the capsule is not going to be able to return until February. So, that's another 6 months for the astronauts to be in space for what was supposed to be an 8-day mission. And so once they actually are able to return, they will have been up at the International Space Station for 8 total months versus 8 total days, which is crazy. But the main reason is NASA is just putting, their lives as a first priority, which is understandable. And they weren't willing to deal with the Starliner technical difficulties with the helium leaks and thruster problems. And so the Starliner capsule is going to return to Earth unmanned by itself. Actually, I don't even know if it's returned already, but that was the news.
What we'll have to see is does Boeing decide to scrap the Starliner project? Right? Because they'd already put in billions and still cannot get it to work. And so if they return it unmanned, then they need to go through a certification process for any updates and changes, right? And it still means they'd have to test another launch and then some type of manned return of the capsule for NASA to basically sign. And I don't know if they're in a position to do that, right?
Yeah.
They've got other fish to fry at this point and just getting their core commercial airplane business. Or
I wonder what the culture is or just the morale at Boeing right now. It must be really difficult to be working there
no,
in this type of environment.
yeah. I mean, supposedly the group that's working on Starliner is a completely separate group or division. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
Or they could be it's just another day.
Another blip in the road.
Yeah.
Or are you saying another day because they're just so accustomed to?
Yeah, exactly, right? Because this has been going on for years. And so again,
Yeah.
no fault of the worker. I'll call everybody worker bees, like I was a worker bee and you were working right. Below the exec level, it's just you just kind of have to accept it for what it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you're right. It has been going on for years. The Styliner group is separate in terms of, working environments and situations than the airline group. But as a whole, Boeing has been plagued with a lot of issues. I mean, the 737 issues.
Yep.
So, yeah, not sure what to make of it. But we have a heavy reliance on this company because they make so much of our commercial, products.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Related to space talk is a spacewalk that's coming up. And I didn't actually know about this until last week, but it's really cool because SpaceX, who is the savior of the Starliner astronauts, Elon Musk, they're actually trying to do the first commercial spacewalk. And so last week, they were expected to launch some Falcon rockets into the air and bring 4 civilians into space to then complete the first commercial spacewalk. And the people that they're sending on this mission is a 4-person crew made up of billionaire Shift4 founder Jared Isaacman,
Hmm.
his friend Scott Poteet, and a pair of SpaceX employees. So they're all civilians. None of them are trained astronauts. And SpaceX is going to send them into space so they can have an open walk in space. It's crazy.
I've watched too many space movies to even consider that myself.
Please, like,
Uh,
hoping the line stays checked so that they don't get just,
yeah, like once you're gone, you're just gone, and like there's really nowhere to. It's not gonna be like in the movies, right? If you get ejected somehow and your momentum takes you someplace, it's like you are not coming back. There is no last minutes. Jason Bourne is not gonna come save you.
it's not like Gravity where you're not Sandra Bullock where you can
Oh, yes, that's
accurately
the other one I
time
was.
their thrusters to land to get capsule.
Yeah, that's the other one I was thinking. I mean, it's interesting. It's like it's something that needs to happen for our civilization to develop into a spacefaring civilization. It's super
Yeah,
risky. I
and
was just reading it, and it's like part of it is to send them into the Van Allen radiation belts to test the suits. It's like, holy crap, you can be bombarded by like tons of radiation. And it's just like, all right, good luck.
yeah,
It's got to happen, but wish them luck.
but also
I think this goes back to what I was talking about, right? It's like Elon's theory on speed, right? Is how quickly can we develop this?
yeah,
Their suit, they've only spent like what, 2.5 years apparently, according to an article I've read. 2.5 years developing a suit. NASA has spent years developing their spacesuits. So again, this is startup mentality. Is that going to work for something like this versus building
gonna
something
say
or a car?
I was gonna say in contrast to Boeing, right? You got SpaceX who's just progressing so fast. Uh,
Yeah.
the big thing 3 years ago was the commercial flight to space, just people in the Dragon capsule. And
Yeah.
3 years later, now they're getting ready for a spacewalk. I think the next thing that Elon is probably planning is first commercial trip to the moon, right? And so when's that going to happen?
Yep.
So they're just progressing so quickly with these milestones, which is pretty amazing. But to your point, so far it's been fine, meaning they've had a lot of rocket crashes and rocket explosions,
Mhm.
but so far their civilian milestones have gone off without a hitch. So
Yeah.
hopefully they keep
They've only lost.
going.
Yeah, they've only lost one rocket, which was made as satellite. Remember that?
Yeah, that's right. So that's happening. It was supposed to happen last Wednesday, but it got delayed due to weather as well as some technical things that they wanted to look into. And so they'll regroup and try to launch them again. But exciting stuff. I think I'm going to pay attention and watch this one live. All right, let's move on to the next story. NVIDIA earnings. What did we say last week? I think we were saying a bunch of stuff around earnings. We did some quick predictions. I
Mhm.
remember I said that I think things are priced in and it's either going
Mhm.
to stay stable unless they have come out with something surprising. It's either going to just stay stable or sell the news event. And I don't necessarily think it was a sell the news event, but it did drop the next day by about 8% due to the lower growth forecast. But to sum up, the NVIDIA earnings that everyone was paying attention to last week, I heard people had watch parties for NVIDIA earnings.
Yeah, there was one, it was in New York. I guess somebody had tweeted out
That's
starting a
crazy.
watch party. That feels like the story of the cabbie giving stock advice and then whoever sold it all because of that was the key to the Great Depression.
Well, they beat estimates. They had a record quarterly revenue of 30 billion, up 15% from Q1. And by the way, this is their Q2 fiscal year earnings and up 122% year over year. They had a record quarterly data center revenue of 26.3 billion, up 16% from Q1 and up 154% year over year. And they announced a $50 billion stock buyback, which will make the stock go up since they're going to be buying a bunch of stock. They projected a 80% quarter-over-quarter growth for the next quarter, which is still close to 100% growth. The reason why that's taken as bad news from the street is because that's slower growth than they've had in the past. And so whenever analysts are formulating their price to earnings ratios and all that stuff, that's not as high as growth traditionally. And so that's going to cause a little bit of sell off. They also mentioned that they were sending samples of Blackwell chips to customers. But I think the street took that as Blackwell being delayed because they're sending samples to test out versus actually sending out the Blackwell chips, which are supposed to be going out, I think, by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So the next day, there was a bit of a sell-off. They were down as much as, I think, 7 to 8%, but then rebounded a little bit and closed the week 5% down from Wednesday's close before earnings. So that's a summary of earnings. What were your thoughts on NVIDIA?
I'm going to call it pretty flat. I mean, it was at 120 level, which is where it's kind of settled over the past few weeks, right? And so it was expected. I guess expectations are a little bit too high, and that's part of what you said, right? It's just like the growth is just slowing slightly. And so now the question is, well, did we already hit the peak, right? And does it slowly trend down as we progress? Because again, this was meant, I think initially it was because all these hyperscalers were building up their data center, and that's why they needed chips for the actual training. And so if we hit that peak, then does it slowly taper off because they don't need as much training? They're starting to build their own chips, right? So like Apple's already said they're using their own silicon for their AI. Google has already said they're starting to develop their own chips. Same
Yeah.
made same with Amazon, and so have already seen that peak, which wouldn't be surprising. I mean, that's typical semiconductors, right? They have this massive growth, and then they have famine years, right? Where that's the time to buy is those famine years. But yeah, 50 billion stock back, it's a lot. I just don't know the time. I didn't look at the earnings release itself to know what the timing was or what time frame they set. I think that's another thing too. Buybacks. It doesn't happen right away. It could be
Yeah.
like they've authorized, but doesn't mean they actually spend.
But also, that's something that would actually cause the stock to drop because they announce a buyback, then the street's going to want to sell so that they can push the price down
Right.
and get it at a lower price.
Yeah. So I think it's just understanding like where that floor is. Like when does Nvidia think that their stock is actually priced for it to be worth it for them?
Yeah.
It could be 100. They'd be like, oh, $100. We definitely think we need to stay above 100, right? 120 is probably fair value. Let's not spend our 50 billion. And then we were texting about it, but I was like, you know, right, the earnings report gets released early, and then of course they have the earnings call, and I was like, yeah, it's all up to Jensen whether it's, here if he's gonna save it or is he gonna break it, and he actually broke it. And that's why I kinda kept going down after market was because I think he got hung up on explaining this Blackwell delay you mentioned. It kinda made it worse. So it kept going down. But
Yeah.
anyways, still, they're still printing money at this point. It's just a matter of, I think everybody who bought, in the $50, 20 whatever, $25, the amount of exponential growth you'll see is probably, we're not gonna see 280 next year, right? It's kind of a thought process. Who knows though? Who knows?
Who knows?
My advice.
I was looking at the stock performance, and in the past 5 years, the stock has went up 2,748%. So almost 3,000%. That is like if you're an employee at NVIDIA, typically in the tech environment, you're there for maybe 2 years. I'd say
Yeah.
the next checkpoint where you check with yourself is 5 years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who joined, but even 2023, the stock was at $14.
Yeah, I know.
That's 1 year ago.
Yeah,
For those people who
and if you
joined in
think
the
about
last 2 to 5 years.
yeah, and if you think about the tech compensation, right? Even back, let's just say average is 300,000 in equity, right? So 300,000 even 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it's NVIDIA's printed a lot of millionaires.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of millionaires
I
out
think I think easily you could say anybody who joined at least 2 years ago or even a year ago is probably a millionaire right now. It's
That's
crazy.
crazy.
Why do I not have that? Why?
That's but we were also talking about the stock price, and this is not financial advice, but these are my thoughts. I think 109-ish is probably the bottom. Anything between like 109 and 115, I feel is a good place to accumulate. But
Think so?
those are just my thoughts. There's a big buy zone in that area, and I'm not saying it won't ever get down to 100 again. Like 100 would be really sweet, but maybe not this year.
Yeah, that's where my starter position was about 100-ish when it had that dip on the yen on Black Monday. Can we call it Black Monday now?
Oh yeah.
Um, so I had a starter position and never added more to it.
The other thing about semiconductors and in general, it's still a very lucrative business going forward. And now I think it's time to look at the other players. So AMD is
Mhm.
popping a lot because there's speculations and news around how they can stay competitive in this world since they are similar to NVIDIA. And then Intel recently announced that they're going to be looking into restructuring, and that caused that stock to pop about 12% in one day.
Purely though. See what the consultants say.
Mhm. So semiconductor chips in general, I think is still a good investment long term. NVIDIA right now is stabilized, but it's still very much, in my opinion, overpriced. But
Yeah.
everyone's betting on this company. So yeah, congrats to NVIDIA.
All right, the other big news, I don't even news, big rumor. Apparently, it's OpenAI is going for another funding round, but this time valued at being $100 billion. Not only is the number kind of eye-watering, but it seems everybody is scrambling to be part of this. Namely, Apple and NVIDIA have been named as the biggest potential investors and participants around. So I just thought it was interesting just because OpenAI, and we haven't talked about in a few weeks. But yeah, I mean, this would be a big funding round, taking them over $100 billion, dollars, and namely because Apple and NVIDIA kind of want to be part of that. So we'll see. It's just interesting. It's frenemies joining together hand in hand, right? Because Microsoft has already invested like what 19 billion in this, right? And so now you have Apple coming into it. I guess
Google
everybody's
is
an
scrapping their
NVIDIA customer. Google is like, "What do we do?" Yeah, actually, that's a good point, right? Because then it's like Apple, Microsoft, right? Those are the top. Well, NVIDIA, the top three versus Google, which is one. So if you think about the top five, I guess when I say top five valued companies at the moment are all here,
except
right?
Amazon.
Except Amazon. Amazon's off doing its own thing, which is kind of like a side note thing I was reading also about their investment in Claude and Alexa.
Hmm. Yeah, I think my head goes to two notable winners in this versus Apple. Like Apple's playbook and strategy for these things is pretty great. I mean, they've got
Yeah,
Google on one hand with Google search being the default in Apple, right? So that's enemies getting together, but it's benefited Apple tremendously. They have a better
yeah,
search engine.
yeah,
Now they've got Chat GPT that's going to be mostly powering their Apple Intelligence product.
yeah.
Yet they're just throwing money at it versus having to do any of the
Right.
sausage making.
Yeah,
So they're a clear winner. And then Microsoft, like Microsoft's control and basically just getting to the pie early, right? By
yeah,
investing and guiding OpenAI from a very early stage
Yeah.
is paying off 100x, eventually. So
Well, I mean, we'll see. The market doesn't think so at the moment.
the
We'll see.
market doesn't, yeah, but
Yeah, it's actually been trending down, right? As far as like they had the huge spike and now it's still off. It's been kind of a laggard, to be honest.
yeah. But Microsoft also a huge corporation, and that's the other thing that I was listening to on another podcast is around the whole Google antitrust lawsuit. And
Yeah.
the issue we get with these huge companies is that they've got many profitable business lines,
Mhm.
but because they're all together, you can't really realize the profit of one individual business line. I think it was like
Mhm.
examples like YouTube. YouTube's value is actually being diminished in Google's stock price because it's under the umbrella of Alphabet and Google, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so Microsoft is a huge, huge company. And yeah, like this type of thing where it's benefiting Microsoft in the long run is going to be clouded by their other business lines that maybe
Yep.
bring it down. But yeah, I think like those are my two kind of notable winners in this whole OpenAI
Yeah.
deal.
So we'll see. I'll be interested to see how it shakes out. And if they actually have this much interest, I'm more curious on what the presentation is on why they think they're worth 100. That's always interesting. Like,
Yeah.
how do they justify that the up round, right? And so that's what I'll be interested to see. Like, how do they position it? What are they planning for the next couple of years, right? I think that to me is the most.
Yeah. I mean, it says annualized reported revenue eclipsed 3.4 billion this year.
That
Track.
is crazy in and of itself because, like, last year it was a billion, right, in revenue, but now it's like 3.4.
Yeah. But still on track to lose 5 billion by the end of the year.
Which, again, AI is not cheap.
Yeah. I'm just hoping I'm pulling for OpenAI. I've given my thoughts on what I've heard or what my perspective of Sam Altman in the past.
Yep.
I'm just hoping it's not another WeWork situation.
Yeah. 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 Anyways, so yeah. So this led off into like kind of my side note topic to
Okay.
kind of close it out. But yeah, I saw this other story about so Amazon is not part of. I'll just call it the Open AI consortium at
Yeah.
this point, right? They've gone off and decided to place their bets on Claude, which is Claude AI, which is Anthropic's whatever. It's Claude AI, it's led by Anthropic, which is basically another competitor to OpenAI. I think they're European French based.
I've heard
They're a French company.
a lot of content writers are turning to Claude over
Yeah,
OpenAI
I've heard a lot of people say Claude is better at this point, but I
for
haven't.
content writing, right?
Yeah, yeah. But anyways, so this is Amazon's bets to Claude AI, and apparently they are integrating it into a super Alexa, or as they call it, remarkable Alexa, and they're going to be charging for it. $5 to $10 a month, it looks like, planned for October.
You just
So
triggered
I'll
my
be
Alexa.
I did.
Alexa, stop.
Alexa, stop. I'll just say Amazon's AI assistant. Yeah, 5-10 bucks. What's interesting is because if you haven't seen, maybe I'll talk about this too, or just mention it. So Apple has sent out their next iPhone event for September 9th, I
September 9th.
believe. And so again, this is where everybody is like holding their breath. Like, what is the next iPhone? The AI enabled iPhone.
Yeah,
We'll see. All the timing is interesting, right? So
totally.
Apple's iPhone 16 in September. Amazon's like, oh yeah, we've got our super Alexa, super AI, whatever chatbots.
Yeah,
October. And it gives you, I think people will use that as a kind of level set because I think the thing about Apple was like, how are they planning to monetize it, right? And so if Amazon's doing 5 to 10 bucks a month, you can use that as like a base case for
Mm.
what Apple could potentially do.
So you think
So
Apple's
maybe
going
that's
to charge for Siri?
for the AI version of Siri. Maybe not out of the gate because they're doing it kind of like offloading it at the moment to chat. But once they do their actual Apple Intelligence version, maybe they do like a pro version of Siri for like $5.
Hmm.
I bet.
That's growth. That's a growth player there.
That's what I've seen numbers. Apple has like what 1 billion Apple device users, right? And if 25% of them adopt it, that's like what $5 each incremental revenue a year.
Interesting. Well, we shall see. September 9th will be a good. I guess next week we should do some predictions on it, and then we'll record after the event.
Yeah, more predictions. Never stops.
All right. Well, congratulations to OpenAI for getting that huge investment. I'm still waiting for all the cool features you promised at your last demo day, which I still have not got as a paying customer. So please unlock that for me because I'm using ChatGPT a lot. All right. Well, good episode. And we are commemorating episode 28 by both wearing orange, unplanned.
Plans?
But orange is a good color. All right. I'll talk to you next week.
All right.